Hey everyone, welcome back to CK Cycles. Well, it's time to get the front forks rebuilt on my 1965 Honda S90. One of the things I was worried about with these forks that are fully enclosed is that the forks on the bike would be fully rusted in like this and nearly impossible to rebuild and maybe just need to be replaced. But the only way I can find out is if I take the forks off the bike and inspect them a little bit closer. Removal of the front wheel on the S90 is pretty straightforward and went well, other than forgetting to have the rear wheel plate of my motorcycle lift in place. I used a flathead screwdriver here to help open up the lower triple tree clamp on the S90 in order to get the forks out. They needed a little persuasion with my plastic hammer here, but otherwise they came out smoothly, and this gave me quite a bit of hope that the forks were in decent shape. The oil in the forks was pretty old and nasty, and there was a little bit of water that came out with the oil. This all will be replaced and fresh oil added as a part of the rebuild. The forks in this bike do not have a circlip holding the inner fork tube and the outer fork tube, but instead have a seal housing that is a screw-on type. The seal housings came off easily and could be unscrewed by hand. After removing the washer, I got a look at the seals, which were old and dry rotted and cracked pretty good. Using a screwdriver, I was able to easily pop them out so they could be replaced. Time to get everything cleaned up. I created a inner fork tube mount that could be chucked in my drill press so I could spin them in order to get them cleaned up with some emery paper. Here I'm using a homemade potentiometer as kind of a dial or a dimmer switch to control the speed of the drill press to keep it turning nice and slow. Although the inner fork tubes had some rust and pitting on the upper portion that does not travel within the seal, they're still in pretty good shape and I think they will work just fine. I was able to locate a kit on eBay at a reasonable price that included just about everything I needed to rebuild these forks. It included some new outer springs, some new boot covers, and the fork seals themselves. The one thing the kit did not include were the plastic spring guides. Those had to be ordered independently. The boots included some molded holes on the bottom portion of them. I believe these holes are there to allow for any moisture to drain out of the boot so it doesn't rust on the fork. I just made sure all these holes were free and clear before installation. Assembly of the fork is pretty straightforward and just goes in the opposite order that the fork was taken apart. I made sure that I covered everything in a liberal coat of oil and then also WD-40 just to help with some rust prevention in the future. After making sure I had the seal oriented correctly, I installed it into the seal housing. I started off with just pushing it into the housing, but then seated it to its final position using one of the old seals as a buffer as I pounded it into place. I coated this portion of the inner fork tube with a pretty decent coat of WD-40. This is the portion that had some rusting and pitting on it, and I just want to make sure it's protected from moisture for the future. I decided to install the outer fork spring with the short distant coils of the progressive spring facing up. This is in contradiction to the spring that was removed when I disassembled the fork. I made this decision about spring orientation after reviewing the service manual. The service manual I found showed that the progressive part of the spring with the short coils does face towards the top of the fork. I reviewed the parts diagram on Partzilla, which did not show a progressive spring, and so that was not helpful in figuring out the orientation. A two-piece spring guide was taken off of the forks in disassembly, but upon looking at the parts diagram and what parts were currently available, I decided to go with a single-piece spring guide to put back onto the fork. With the forks fully rebuilt, it was time to get them installed back on the bike. They easily slid into the lower clamp, and then I was able to fill them back up with the appropriate amount of fork oil that I found in the service manual. Overall, I think the rebuild of the forks on this S90 went very well. They disassembled easily and reassembled easily, and I think they look really good. Next, I'm going to be moving on to the upper bridge of the fork mount and also the handlebar mounts. I'm also going to be looking into getting a front wheel on this bike, and then I can progress further on the rest of the rebuild. This is Chris for CK Cycles. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you later.